Perhaps the most common mistake made when using Briwax is to use too much. I'm going to show you a couple of ways to correct this mistake. The first method is just use steel wool, fine steel wool, to remove the excess. If you've really overdone it, the second method, using mineral spirits, will quickly get your finish back on track. Too much wax is really only a problem on hard wearing surfaces like desk and tabletops, or handrails or headboards. You'll see here that the excess wax could rub off onto clothing or bed linens. I made these two cupboards to look like antique trunks, and I did them in a distressed red paint. I wanted it to look old, so I used dark brown Briwax over the red paint to give it a glazed effect, and I left it heavy for that glazed effect to make them look dirty and aged. Now sometimes you overdo it, and you see here I got some streak marks on there, rag marks, which doesn't look very genuine. But I can just take those out, take that excess off with fine steel wool here. Not the coarse steel wool, this is the 40, the fine steel wool, and just rub gently and it takes the excess off. So we're taking a measured amount of wax here, and I'm just using it to detail it to get the desired glazed effect that I want without making it look contrived with streaky marks on it. This is a surface that's not likely to get very much use. This is a cupboard, a side of a cupboard. It's not, you're not going to be putting dinner plates on it and things like that. And so a soft finish, like a wax finish, left heavy as a glaze, is not likely to get rubbed off on anybody's clothing or linens or anything like that. So on finishes like this, or like beams or wainscot or picture frames or something like that aren't handled or used or rubbed against, are fine if you have a bit too much wax on it, or if you intentionally put too much wax on it to darken it more than it otherwise would be, or to create a glazed effect. It's fine for those. I'll just buff it with a clean cloth after I've done it with the fine steel wool to put a sheen back on it. The steel wool will sort of dull it down while I'm fetching some of the wax off. And here you can see I've been a little bit sloppy putting it on, and that steel wool I can just go through and clean off some of the excess, the hardened wax that's been stuck there, and I can do that without cleaning off the whole finish. Now this oak coffee tabletop has a nice wax finish, all buffed out, but I'm going to go ahead and overdo it with the wax just to show you how you can kind of overdo it. Here I'm loading the wax, put way too much wax on, and then I'm not really rubbing off the excess, I'm just leaving it piled up on there. And this wax the solvent will dry out, it'll harden, and you'll be able to buff it and get a shine out of it, but it's going to be a problem because it's a hard wearing surface, unlike the trunks or the cupboards that we just looked at, or picture frames or beams that are rarely handled. You know, if you wax some beams up on your roof, nobody's ever going to touch it after you're done waxing it, so it's not an issue. But if it's a bed or a headboard or a table, then people are going to be handling it, and people putting their forearms on the edge of the table, well, the excess wax might rub off on their clothes, and it's going to be a hassle. So here I am smearing way too much wax and not really rubbing it in, and not wiping off the excess, and then I'm going to let it dry. I'm going to buff it, and I'm going to show you the problem, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. So you can see here the finish has dark streaks, and it's got swirl marks where the wax wasn't rubbed off. You can just see the rag marks there. And here, you can see here the wax piled up there was going along with the edge. Cross grain just looks sloppy. Here, big old streak. Look, I can scratch it off with my fingernail. It's so thick there. Now, you could just buff all this excess off with a rag. When you buff, you should buff really hard when you're doing a hard wearing surface like this, like a tabletop. You see it's coming off on the rag. You could just buff all the excess wax off, but it would be hard and take you a lot of rags because you really have to buff hard to get it all off. There's an easier way to get all that extra wax off at this point. We're just going to go get ourselves a little bit of mineral spirits or paint thinner. I'm going to dampen a rag, and then just let the mineral spirits dissolve that excess wax. It's probably going to take off too much wax, but you can see here the finish is lightening up a little bit, and the excess wax is coming off. Of course, we're loading this rag up. We'll have to get another rag to help wipe off the excess, but it just cleans off nice and easy. If we were really trying to strip all the wax off, we'd be a bit more aggressive and maybe use a scrub brush and maybe steel wool or something like that to try to get all the wax out of the grain. But that's not what we're doing. We're just trying to correct having too much wax on. We want a wax finish here, but we've just put way too much on, and so we're just trying to back up a step. We're not trying to strip it. If we were trying to strip it, you'd really have to get a little bit more aggressive. It's the same process, but you'd just be a bit more thorough and aggressive and use a scrub brush to get into the grain. You'd still use paint thinner and rags to get it all off, but you'd use you'd use maybe a bit more mineral spirits and scrub brush to more aggressively get the wax out of the grain. But we're just trying to remove the excess, which this is doing just fine. We're probably removing a little bit too much, and once the paint thinner is dry, we'll go ahead and do a nice coat of wax. You'll see here I'm just putting the proper amount on, and I'm rubbing it in and wiping off the excess so I don't make the same mistake that I just had to correct. And I'll go ahead and do a piece at a time and making sure that I don't put too much wax on. Wax is an evaporative finish, meaning it doesn't undergo a chemical reaction. The solvent just dries out and it hardens up. So it's the same thing in the can as it is on the table, except minus the solvent. So the wax that we didn't get out of the tabletop when we were ragging it off with the mineral spirits is the same as the wax we're putting on. You can melt it, let it harden, melt it, let it harden 1,000 times. It's still going to be the same wax every time it's dried out. So we're going to buff here, and you see when you buff, you rub really hard. You want to take off the excess. You see it's coming off on the rag here, and you want to buff it off on the rag so it doesn't come off on the sleeves of your shirt when you're sitting at your table. I like to think when I'm buffing it off, I tell people just pretend you've made a terrible mistake and you're trying to rub it all off, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to get the excess wax off of there. And this is for a hard wearing surface. You know, if it weren't, like those trunks I did, I could just buff those lightly and get a shine, and that'd be fine, you know, and have my sheen, have my wax finish. But, you know, people aren't going to be rubbing their elbows on it. This is the tabletop, it is. So you buff it hard, as you see I'm doing here. Now when you're buffing it out, you want to keep turning your rag to a clean area. It gets a little bit waxy as it pulls up the excess, and it doesn't buff as effectively then. So keep turning it over to the clean area and keep buffing. can see here all our swirls and smudge marks and streaks and rag marks are all gone, and we've got a nice hard wax finish on here with a nice satin sheen, and most importantly, it's not going to rub off on your sleeves.